lytter til Københavns Universitets seneste forsøg på at forklare verden. Sammen undersøger vi, hvad vi ved, hvad vi ikke ved, og hvad vi diskuterer endnu. Velkommen til Verden forsøgt forklaret.
It's Valentine's Day, and what better occasion to talk about lies and deception in romantic relationships. I can see that there are some couples out here. My advice to you is just to look straight ahead and pretend that this is not about you, it's about all the other couples. You are, of course, 100% honest, all of you. We are here to talk about dishonesty in romantic relationships, which is an awkward topic. We want to be able to trust our partner more than anyone else, and we want our partner to trust us more than anyone else. Enter Rachele Mazzini, who spoils it all by doing research that shows how dishonest we are, all of us. Do you want to spoil all the romance, Rachele?
Yeah, that's exactly where I went for this PhD, and I think it's a perfect topic for tonight. So I'm very excited to present my research, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. So thank you all for being here.
Rachele, you are Italian. You're making your research here in Copenhagen at the Department of Psychology. What led you to this devilish topic, and how did you end up here?
So that's an interesting journey, because my journey started in Italy, and I have a psychology bachelor, and then I moved to the Netherlands to do a social psychology research master, because I also see myself as a researcher other than a psychologist. And that's when I had the first contact with relationship science, and I did an internship into relationship science, but the topic was a bit different, boredom. So that's when I started also to work on topics like personality that maybe we'll mention tonight. And thanks to a friend of mine who's been living in Copenhagen for years, I found this PhD, I applied for it, and it was the perfect combination of, you know, all the things that I had researched and studied before. And now I'm here, and I've been here for 2 years. So that's how I ended up in Copenhagen.
And why do you find dishonesty so interesting?
Well, I believe, and also before starting the PhD, and this has been confirmed while during my PhD, I think we're all dishonest, especially to our partners every day. And
every day?
Yeah. to a very little extent, but the statistics is that people tell on average 1 lie per day to their significant other. And I also know how painful it can be when a partner is dishonest to you. So I thought it would be a very interesting topic to research, and especially it's a topic that everybody seems really interested into. And it's also, I think it's also important because, you know, it's connected to other, let's say, to the pillars of relationships, so trust, monogamy in the case of a monogamous relationship, communication. So it really touches many things, many different aspects of a relationship, and I was personally fascinated by that. And also, there's many connections between dishonesty and, I don't know, culture or personality, as I mentioned right before. So I think it's a very fascinating topic to explore.
It is fascinating. Do you have a personal sort of experience with dishonesty in relationships?
I do. And I hope the perpetrator...
We'll talk about that for the rest of the evening. So.
I hope that the perpetrator of this dishonesty will not listen to the podcast, but I don't care. So I do. Unfortunately, I got cheated on, and that was a painful experience, of course, which came about with a number of challenges, especially going into the next relationship. And that's something that also came up from my data. But I have to say that this PhD has helped me view dishonesty in a different way, that is not all negative, but it can also be a positive experience. So that dishonesty is not all negative. And sometimes there are some forms of dishonesty. Of course, what I believe it's the milder ones, like white lies or keeping a small secret. These are types of dishonesty that to some extent can benefit a relationship and maybe avoid something bigger. But of course, I'm not saying you should cheat to your partner. This is not what I'm encouraging. But I think that experience and then coming across this PhD, I think it was also a personal journey. And I grew to be really fond of this topic. Yeah, that's what I think about it.
And we will dive into the different forms of dishonesty and the different content of the dishonesty and the consequences of the dishonesty. But first, could you briefly explain how you do research in a topic that is so intimate and loaded with embarrassment and shame and awkwardness?
Yeah, so we use, with my team, we take what we call a mixed method approach, just like in very simple terms. The study that we're gonna talk about today, or the knowledge that I will be sharing with you today, is from this study where we did an online survey with open-ended questions, and we made sure that all the data were completely anonymized, of course, also when reporting the data in the article, so that's very important. But what we did, we just asked people, please tell me about one episode when you were dishonest to your partner, and we gave them some prompts to have more information, such as the context, the motives behind it, and so on, so what we were interested in. And then a second question, still open-ended, so we asked them to write at least 200, 100 words, but still we let them just like free to write whatever they wanted. While in the following studies that I'm doing as part of my PhD, we are taking a more quantitative approach. So we actually have questionnaires that people fill in, no open-ended questions, or maybe a few, but it's not in the plan right now. So we use a mixed method approach to have both the qualitative experience, which is what helps you as a researcher to really get some data that mirror the real experiences of people, like what actually happened in their relationship, and to grasp even the tiniest details about dishonesty that a questionnaire wouldn't grasp. And then we also have the questionnaire to also run some statistical analysis and so on.
Great. So you said before that we're honest every day in our relationship. Could you tell me what are some of the basic reasons for why we are dishonest in our relationships? Why?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because that's one of the main things that I learned while I was, conducting this study. So people have a lot of justifications, that they told us, or they tell in general for why they are dishonest. It can be a relationship that is not working anymore. It can be what we would call a desirable alternative, so someone that, looks and feels better than your partner. It can be many things. It can be revenge. It can be out of many different reasons. Sorry, I got lost in my flow of thoughts.
I guess it could also be a fear of consequences, avoiding awkward or bad consequences for the relationship. You want to keep a good mood.
Yeah, exactly. So what I came to understand is that I would say the vast majority of our sample, so the people, our participants, told us, I'm doing this because I want to protect my partner. I want to avoid a bigger argument. I want to avoid, in more general terms, bigger consequences, more negative consequences. But what I wonder and what I think is that, on the other hand, you're also avoiding negative consequences for yourself. So what we would call pro-social motives or protective motives are also self-protective motives, because you're also avoiding something negative for yourself. So I think, while we can also see this as a way to protect the relationship, thinking of a monogamous relationship where the dyad is you and the partner, but I think ultimately you want to protect yourself other than your partner, but...
Normally you would judge it to be more noble to protect your partner than protecting yourself.
Yes, I think so. Because if the reason for your dishonesty, which is something that in general we would not consider moral, so if your dishonesty is you see it as something that has a prosocial motive, so I'm protecting someone else, and this someone else is not just anyone else, but your significant other, so your partner, then you also have a better view of yourself. So this is something that also enhances your self-view, and there is actually a bias for that we discuss also in the paper, so that people, this self-enhancement bias, that by just justifying your dishonesty as, I wanted to protect my partner, I wanted to avoid bigger consequences, I didn't want them to get hurt because it made no point, in getting them hurt. In the end, you're also having a more positive view of yourself.
You told me something that I find quite weird, which is that some people even feel relieved or excited after having lied to their partner. Yeah. I mean, I think I would feel immediately guilty. What is this mechanism?
Yeah, so that was really interesting because, of course, I would expect, most of the participants told us I felt guilty, I felt shameful, and so on. But also some people told us, we felt excited right after I was dishonest to my partner. And there's this quote from a participant that I remember, somebody that said, I felt a thrill for sneaking around. So it's probably the idea of doing something that you should not be doing, or of breaking like one of the fundamental relationship rules, which is trust or even fidelity, for example, that maybe gives you that excitement, but eventually what we notice is that excitement doesn't last forever. Eventually all the negative feelings start piling up, and then the person has experiences even stronger negative consequences that people who feel guilty right away and have time to process what happened do. But it's still a very interesting finding.
It is. It's peculiar. So let's dig into the forms of dishonesty. You distinguish between 4 types: withholding information, lies, active deception, and infidelity. I think we'll keep infidelity out of the picture for now because it's a grand topic in itself. It would be a talk in itself. So let's start with perhaps the mild one, you might say, withholding information. What are the reasons for withholding information for your partner?
So withholding information can be mild. But I mean, if you don't tell your partner that you have a bank account or that you got a raise, it can be something that is more serious and matters more to the relationship. What I find, and this is maybe true for all the forms of dishonesty, but what I find, let's say one reason that some participants mentioned and is not in the paper is that sometimes dishonesty is the easy way. So sometimes you get away with it really easily, and sometimes it's much easier to hide something instead of just telling your partner, I have a secret bank account, or I don't know, I got this new thing on Vinted and I don't want you to see it because I have a spending problem. These are all real examples, the ones that I'm making. But sometimes I think is the easy way out. And even if people know that honesty should be the right course of action, dishonesty is still the easy way out, I would say.
So there's a range here, like the big secrets, and then there are the trivialities. I mean, you're not telling your partner perhaps everything that goes on when you're on the toilet, or trivial stuff. That's one thing. It could also a secret could also be very benign. It could be a gift you're going to give to your
Yeah.
partner or a surprise you're going to
Yeah.
give them. That's also dishonesty.
Yeah. And I had some participants telling me, yeah, I wanted to surprise my partner, so I made up a whole thing, or like I didn't tell them anything. I pretended I was going somewhere else just to surprise them. But they still consider that a form of dishonesty, even if the outcome was positive and the intention behind it was positive. So it's not explicitly mentioned in the paper, but I am also considering dishonesty all the things that my participants consider dishonesty. So I'm not putting, let's say, my own filter onto the data. I'm just reporting what the data told us. But even like that could be considered a form of dishonesty, which is really interesting.
I've seen people getting mad at their friends for making a surprise party for them because of the deception around it.
Yeah.
And the surprise as well, because they don't like surprises. That's
Yes.
whole.
We had some examples of that, of a partner just getting mad because of the deception around the birthday party or a surprise.
So you also have sort of an in-between category between withholding information and lies that are half-truths.
Yeah.
What are those?
So half-truths is a really interesting concept. So it's either withholding some information, but not all the information, or lying about some details of something that happens. But of course, the motive behind it is deceptive. Like I'm keeping these details from you because I don't want you to know them, same as with the lie. Or it can be both, that you keep some details, you lie about some details, but some details are actually true. So the statement that you, like what you tell your partner is technically true, is just either missing something or you slightly changed, like you changed some details slightly.
You have an example in your material with a man who was on a trip with some friends, and he shared a tent with a woman. Nothing happened, but still he didn't disclose exactly that detail, that it was a woman he shared a tent with, just to avoid any possible jealousy reaction.
Yes, and I mean, this is a detail that I would personally like to know. So I don't think it was that small of a detail, but it's still like a good example of, I mean, I actually told my partner the truth. I went on a camping trip. I was sleeping in a tent. I just didn't tell them who I was sleeping with in this tent. But yeah, this is probably also half-truths, I think, are a type that people resort to very often. Because still, like, if you think about it from a moral point of view, you are disclosing some parts of the truth. So technically, it's not as morally despicable as another type where you just straight out lie or just hide everything. So it's a very interesting one.
So let's go to the lies. You distinguish, as we probably all do, between white lies and serious lies. Where's the limit between these two?
That's a very good question. So the limit is I will just quote my participants. So according to our sample, so white lies are insignificant things that don't matter to a relationship, such as a real life example. I once baked a cake for my partner, and he never told me that the cake was horrible, so I kept baking it until one day he couldn't keep up with it, and he told me, sorry, like, you make it too raw. It's absolutely disgusting. So this is a white lie that you think, like, in the short term and even in the long term is not going to have a big impact. And maybe it's going to make your partner feel better, like, oh, I love your outfit, and actually you don't, these kind of things. Whereas a serious lie is something that is deemed to be serious for the relationship, and that the participant itself said, yeah, this is something important that I lied about. And it can range from, very different things, like, for example, some people lied about their income to their partner. Some people lied about seeing someone else or being with someone that their partner didn't like, or lying about, if you like or dislike your partner's friends or your in-laws and so on. So it can range. The range is really broad, but it always depends on how you perceive it. So for me, it's like if my participant tells me, okay, this is a white lie, then I will classify that as a white lie, and vice versa.
And so the really ugly one is the one called active deception. I guess that's when you sort of keep a very big lie over a long period of time.
So active deception is a type that can be controversial because nobody really framed active deception before. But it was, I think, really evident from our data that there was a fourth type. And this type is mainly, as I say, like behavioral. So if I can just give you a very simple description, you're being dishonest through your actions. Meaning, for example, masking your feelings, acting the opposite of how you're feeling, or deleting proofs of dishonesty. For example, some people had some sort of addiction, I don't know, maybe to alcohol. They were hiding cans of beer that they were drinking. Faking orgasms is one of the subcategories that the participants, identified as active deception. But yeah, active deception is usually nonverbal, but is something that, with your body language, with your expressions, with your actions, you also are dishonest. So it's really like being full on into it.
And in your material, you have an example of a man having a secret bank account because he wants to hide his financial overspending and so on. But the faking of orgasm is interesting because it's a thing that is sort of out there that we talk about as a thing that many, especially women, do. It has sort of an air of being more innocent than hiding that you're an alcoholic, hiding your financial.
Yeah, of course. Like, let's say that these examples, these subcategories, they'll go along a continuum. Like, they can be milder or more serious. But I found it interesting that faking orgasms was there because it's considered like being dishonest to your partner. And maybe like the reason why you're faking orgasms is not openly discussed or communicated to your partner. So that's really interesting. But and I mean, if it's there, if it's, in, let's say, a subcategory of that type, I know I'm talking about categories and types a lot, I hope nobody gets lost, but it's because it was mentioned often. So it's something that people mentioned often. So worth being there and being considered.
So let's look a bit about what partners are dishonest about the consent. You name 8 areas: emotions, self and image, health, sexuality, misdeeds, finances that we've talked about, whereabouts, and social relationships. Let's look at some of them. I don't think we have time to all of them. But emotions, which emotions do people lie about and why?
I think especially negative ones. So, for example, like it can range from I'm having a bad day or I'm feeling this way, like, I'm feeling a bit down today, to I'm not sure if I love you anymore. So it can be quite broad. Yeah. So about like we range from feelings that can be milder to feelings that are a bit more important, such as like I'm questioning this relationship. But it's something that this was one of the content that was mentioned most often together with finances, because I think as contradictory as it can sound, we hide or we lie about the way we feel with the person that we should be disclosing our feelings to. So that's really interesting, I would say, because it was, as I said, a really popular category that popped up in the sample.
An example is lying to your partner about being okay with having an open relationship. Yes.
That happened. I think we actually had one example of that. And indeed, the participant was not happy in this open relationship. I think they were the ones pushing for it to reopen a relationship that was once open. but then they were not fine with it because their partner actually seemed to be more active than they were, or in another number of reasons. So that can be pretty tough. Because maybe you want to keep that relationship, and the only way to keep it after pushing to open it is just to be fine in that situation, even if you're not. So it's sometimes it's a lot of struggles and pain that you read from these data.
So let's go to self and image. What is that about?
Yeah. So basically, everything about yourself. So it can be, for example, lying about or being dishonest, more in general, about some features of yourself, such as your age. We had people lying about their age, or your upbringing. Maybe some people came from a family that had a lot of issues and they didn't want to disclose that with their partner. Also, pretending to be someone that you're not. Lying or being dishonest about the number of sexual relationships you had, because you don't want to look bad into your partner's eyes. And indeed, for that category specifically, the main reason why people were dishonest about themselves was because they were afraid of looking bad in their partner's eyes, that they would see them differently, they would not love them anymore because of some personal attributes.
For many of these, I would think that, if you lie about your age or your success, your degree of success, it will be apparent. If you have a long-term relationship, it will soon be apparent that you were lying. It's quite a gamble.
Yes. I think some people were pretty good at keeping up with it, but I think after some point, at some point, you're wearing a mask. So the mask will eventually fall off. And if I remember, many of the examples, in many of the examples, this is exactly what happened, that the mask eventually fell off and the dishonesty was discovered.
Why do people lie about health?
Yeah, that's also an interesting category. Well, I will start from, health. We split it between physical and mental health. So sometimes it is, especially, when you've just entered a relationship, it is hard to be open with your partner about your mental condition. So we had, even if, if you have a disorder or any condition, it becomes apparent. But also was really surprised to see that some people would lie about their physical or be dishonest about their physical condition. For example, this person who lived on a solitary kidney never told their partner because they thought their family would look down on them. So
I read
really
that, and can you explain why would your partner's family look down on you because you only have one kidney? That's the weirdest status thing ever.
I think sometimes all of these thoughts are in our mind. So that was a worry that this person had, probably because I think they mentioned it was their second marriage for him and his partner. Probably the family was really fond of the previous partner, and there was a
who had two kidneys.
It was a bit of a bigger situation, but that's really interesting because
it's very interesting. Yeah. Let's talk about misdeeds. What are those?
Misdeeds, just in general, is all the things that you do wrong and that you hide from your partner. It can range from breaking a glass to
breaking a glass?
Yeah,
okay.
Or a vase, for example, to going out and being with someone else. So it's really broad.
It could also be criminal things like
also,
being a killer. Or
yeah, we didn't have any of that. But it can also be that. I think we had someone that said, I had a criminal past, or I was in prison and I never told my partner, and then it came out. Yeah. So it's basically, it's just a very broad category because it can be anything. But yeah.
Okay, let's go to the consequences because they're also important. Lies have consequences, often very bad consequences. You have made up a typology, and I'll dive into some of these concepts you have developed. One is called the strained bond.
Yeah.
What is that?
So the strained bond is basically a bond or a romantic connection that has suffered from dishonesty. So here is this big category where we see the detrimental effects that dishonesty has on our relationship. So when dishonesty harms our relationship, and dishonesty actually harms a number of processes and mechanisms in a relationship. The first and foremost is trust. And trust, as intuitively we can imagine, but and also as participants say, is really hard to rebuild, very. Because I believe it's one of the pillars of a relationship. So of course, if you break that pillar, it's really hard to fix it. But there's also communication. Communication is another important one that people after the dishonesty, communication is affected. So either their communication is mostly negative, and in turn we see a lot of tension and a lot of conflict, or there's no communication, so they stop communicating. And especially what I saw happening is that the partner who was dishonest, by having these feelings of guilt and shame, would withdraw from communication. So they stop communicating to the other partner, and the other partner doesn't understand what is going on because maybe they don't know about dishonesty. Just so you know, like the vast majority of dishonesty episodes were not discovered. So the partners didn't know that this happened. I know, but they don't. So they start withdrawing from communication. So sometimes it's just the dishonest partner initiating these negative consequences. And as I said, we have tension, conflict, we have emotional disconnection, so that the partners feel very disconnected. So it can be quite difficult for a relationship. Of course, it depends on the type of dishonesty. White lies often were not associated with many negative outcomes, but other forms, yes. And ultimately, if the relationship cannot survive dishonesty, it can lead to breakup.
So most of these consequences are highly detrimental. I would like to emphasize the perhaps rare thing called the repaired bond, where there's actually some kind of constructive outcome of this.
Yes. So for some people, and unfortunately it's not the majority, but dishonesty was also the occasion to look at the relationship and really try to pursue it to the next level, as someone said. Really give it a chance, really work on improving the relationship, on repairing that bond. So that's why we have the strained bond and the repaired bond. Also it was a learning experience, as they said. I learned something about myself, about my partner, and about my relationship, or about relationships in general. And there were some participants that also, dishonesty was a prompt to go to couple therapy. So actually discussing with an expert, the problems and to try and fix their relationship.
So I'll end with some more general questions. Can lies be detrimental even if they're not discovered?
Yes.
How so?
What I observed is that they can. Because as I mentioned briefly before, what happens is that the person who lied, what we would call the perpetrator, but the liar in this case, or the person who was dishonest, starts having these, what I call the emotional burden. So being dishonest brings about a number of emotions that are often, translated into behavior, and this is something that can affect the couple. As I said before, they withdraw from communication, they start acting strange because they feel guilty, they don't know how to process it, and at the same time, we need to remember that they always fear to be discovered, so they also need to act in order not to not to have their partner discover the dishonesty. So there is fear, and there is guilt, and there is remorse, regret, shame. And this is something that can affect people in their daily life, and those interactions with the partner become less genuine. So even if dishonesty is not discovered, it can be detrimental.
Yeah, it sounds like pure hell to me. Has it changed your perception of distrust to be doing this research?
Of distrust?
Have you changed your perception of it?
Yes, I have. So I walked into this project being absolutely you cannot be dishonest, and so on. But I grew more understanding of dishonesty and of why we are dishonest. I've also been dishonest in my life and also to my partner. So sometimes you are, and now I understand why people are dishonest. And even if I still think, that I would personally not engage in some types of dishonesty, I don't condone it, but I don't condemn it at the same time. Because I think it's still a human feature, and sometimes, it can be the easy way. Sometimes it can be harder, to be honest, and we're navigating relationships, which is a very complex word to navigate. So I grew more understanding of it.
So the big question is, how honest should one be in a relationship? Should we be more honest? Should we be radically honest? Should we be even brutally honest? And I know that's not a research question, but I have to ask you anyway.
It's interesting because, as I mentioned to you, we are 2 PhD students working on this project, and my colleague is working on brutal honesty.
It's a great room they have.
Yeah, where the magic happens at the department. But I think it is really hard to answer this question, because I think it is the best course of action, let's put it this way. Brutal honesty, dishonesty is very specific. It really depends on the situation you're in, the context, your partner, yourself. So we also, there was like a big theme that is not mentioned in this paper about our participants, reflecting on honesty and dishonesty. And some people saying honesty is the best policy, period. And other people saying, no, dishonesty is actually better than honesty if somebody, is not harmed, if it can spare some worry, some pain. So I don't really think there's a better course of action. So sometimes I believe some little white lies, or maybe not telling some tiny details can be beneficial. I'm not, as I said, I'm not telling you to be dishonest, but it can be beneficial sometimes and avoid bigger problems in our relationships.
You heard it from the expert herself. Thank you, Rachele Mazzini. This was the end of the talk, but maybe some of you are curious to ask Rachele some questions.
I was just wondering about the survey. Was it Danes who responded, or was it a cross-national survey? And do you know if there are cross-national or cross-cultural differences in this subject?
Thank you for this question. Because it's something we didn't have time to talk about. So unfortunately, for the sake of time, because a PhD is really short, our participants came from the US because we can pay them, and so we get all these data, and we had about almost 700 participants. So that's a lot, and it's a lot of text to analyze. We had participants from the US. But of course, what I hope in the future is to run some studies that actually explore cultural differences in dishonesty, because I believe the way that dishonesty is even conceptualized, changes in different cultures, in different countries, same as the way it is perceived and accepted or tolerated, if we can put it this way. So unfortunately, this was not. I hope that we just started a line of research that will perpetuate in the future, and I hope the study that you just asked me about, it will be me doing it. But no, so also other cross-cultural studies that have been done, I am not aware of any, unfortunately, because as I said before, surprisingly, there's not much research on this topic, and we all want to hear about it. We're all really interested. It's relatable, but The research is very fragmented, if we can put it this way. But I hope in the future there will be more. And I would also be very interested in, doing a study on Danes, because I heard the results could be interesting. So I would be very interested. That's what I've been told.
Hi, thank you. I'm very curious now because you said you pay the participants. So how are you 100% sure that these participants are honest on your survey?
This is a very good question, and this is the problem that every researcher studying dishonesty, not only in relationships but in general, has. Because if you're studying dishonesty, you have a high chance that your participants are dishonest and that their answers are affected by what we call social desirability. So they want to look good in your eyes, so in the eyes of the researcher, and they give you nice answers. And indeed, from my data, most of the examples of dishonesty that were described were white lies or hiding very small things. And only a few people, because the study was pretty comprehensive, so we had people in a relationship, but also singles. So we could hear like the experience of breaking up because of dishonesty. Very few said, "Oh, I broke up because I cheated on my partner." So of course, this is a risk that you have to run when you're studying dishonesty. There's nothing we can do about it. Maybe in the future, if there's studies, like research that is emerging now, showing the link between personality and dishonesty, maybe we can give them a personality test and figure out if they're like rather dishonest or tend to be more honest. That would be interesting, but it's going to happen in years.
Yes, sorry if I offend anybody, but I'm going to ask a little bit of a binary question here. Did you see any differences in male and females perceiving dishonesty?
Yeah, so we didn't explicitly look at gender differences. My sample was, like the majority was female. It was quite like 50-50, but still more females than males. We didn't specifically look into that, which means when I analyzed the data, I didn't really look at whether the participants, like the participant was female or male. So we didn't look into that. We know from research that males tend to be more dishonest. This is what we know. But unfortunately, we didn't really explore that. What I can tell you is that I personally didn't see huge differences in the way like people felt after being dishonest, because in this study, just to clarify, we only had the perspective of the person being dishonest, not the perspective of the person that was, let's say, the victim of dishonesty, for many reasons. But so we always had the perpetrator perspective, and I see that the emotions and the consequences people experience are very similar. So, and we also had non-binary participants as well. So, but we didn't focus on that. I'm sorry. So I don't really have an answer for that.
Hey, I'm just curious that why not be more confident on ourselves and be more confident on our partner, and trust that they are strong enough to handle the truth instead of lying?
That's a very good question. Very good question. So I think in practical life, sometimes people find it easier and less painful and less, let's say, complex on both sides to just be dishonest and be like, oh, if I tell them that, or if I lie, if I don't lie about it and I just tell them the truth, they're gonna go on for hours. It's gonna be a big argument, and so people just avoid that straight out by just being dishonest. And it's interesting. It's interesting because from a partner, one thing that we know people expect from their partners is that your partner is somebody you can trust, so trustworthy. But we are not honest with our partner, so we kind of, we're not really what we expect our partner to be. So that's really, really interesting. So I don't really have an answer on why people prefer dishonesty over honesty. I can see that sometimes it's probably easier, instead of like being brutally honest, sometimes you have to deliver some truth that is hard to, also for the other person to receive. It's probably just the easier course of action. Not the best, maybe, but the easier. In the long run, it cannot be the best. But, yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question. We talked a lot about the types of dishonesty, and we kind of, I think, equalize dishonesty equal lying. But did you use, or did, so I think if we like Google or something, we get different definitions of dishonesty, but I think it's a subjective term. Did you use any kind of definition of what dishonesty is when you were asking participants?
Yes, we gave them a definition of dishonesty. And the definition was very simple. So any behavior, verbal, any dishonesty, so can be verbal or non-verbal, but it's something that you do to deceive another person. So it was a very, very simple definition. Then in the paper we have a more complex one, which is like going against your beliefs and being deceptive to someone else. This is not the right definition, but so it was a very simple one, but they were provided with a definition of dishonesty. What we didn't provide them with was an example of different types or content or consequences. So maybe we just told them you can lie, you can maybe withhold information, you can cheat on your partner, but we didn't really provide them with specific types. But they were given a little definition just in case, to make sure that they're all on the same page on what dishonesty is.
Thank you for the talk, today especially. I leave the room with some conclusions, and I was wondering if you have validated some of these conclusions maybe with a couple counselors or some theoretical models that may be in the literature and that validate what you have found in the 700 people data that you have.
Very good question. So we haven't, because I think we're still in the very early stages of research in this field. At least that's how I perceive it. We're trying, let's say, to validate our results better by having other studies. Now we are trying to develop a scale to measure dishonesty. That can be potentially, you mentioned counselors and practitioners, that can be potentially in the future, but far away in the future, so in 10, 20 years, maybe a tool that also practitioners can use to measure whether somebody is more or less dishonest than someone else. We know there's links to personality, and we will look into that in my third study that I'm now designing. But what I always say is that my research is meant for other researchers. So to prompt more studies, to encourage more other researchers to study this field, because there's very little that has been done. But in the future, I see at some point the connection with the practitioners, because I think it could be really important. And I would also I am reading books of, practitioners or couple counselors that are working with people that, for example, suffered an affair and so on. And it would be really interesting to see if real life and what happens in those sessions is the same that we get told in the study. It would be really interesting. So definitely I hope in the future that we can make a connection between the two worlds, hopefully.
One last question.
Thank you for a very nice talk. I also think the interviewer was very good. Unfortunately, he didn't want to talk about infidelity. So I would like to ask about that. I think in particular, I would like to know if you somehow have any sense whether small acts of dishonesty somehow add up and pave the road to dishonesty, or whether dishonesty is just a completely separate category that doesn't depend on whether people lie in the small or tell those half-truths. So do you think does it somehow build up, or are these infidelity just a completely different thing?
Okay, so you're asking whether dishonesty and infidelity are just separate, or they can build up on each other, right? So, okay, that's that's a very long answer that I think I have. So I think they are connected. I know there's people who don't think that dishonesty, so the other forms or types, and infidelity are two separate things. But I think they're connected because most of the times, think about you are having an affair with someone. You need to lie about it to cover your affair. You need to hide things. So I think they go in hand. And you often use other forms of dishonesty to cover your infidelity, be it physical infidelity, be it emotional infidelity, online infidelity, whatever you want. So I actually think is rather the second that you mentioned. So it's building up. So it's building up, and I also see it as something that goes in hand with other forms of dishonesty. So they are not separate, but rather I think they are joined. Let's say they go together. Sorry if that was a bit. I'm just trying to make sense of it in my mind as well. So this is what I think. I also think that infidelity is separate in the sense that when you're dishonest, and let's think about lies, active deception, so even hiding your infidelity through your actions or withholding information, these forms of dishonesty, they break the trust contract that you have with your partner, while infidelity breaks the monogamy contract as well that you have with your partner. So that's why the consequences might be a bit different. But I think, infidelity doesn't happen alone. You always have to cover it somehow. So that's where the rest of the dishonesty comes in, and that's why they go hand in hand.
So thank you all for coming, and feel free to hang out a bit more, and especially thanks to you, Rachele Mazzini.
Thank you. Thank you.
Du har lyttet til Verden forsøgt forklaret. En udsendelse fra Københavns Universitet, udviklet med støtte fra Novo Nordisk Fonden.